Our subject is dealing with fear. And it's dealing with this Remembrance Sunday. This is what they're calling today. Today marks 100 years since the end of the First World War. They call it the centenary. A century has passed. That's very significant to us in the nation of Islam, based on the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Because he taught us that their time to rule over black people was up in 1914. So that means that when the war ended in 1918, they're already over time, beloved. That's right. And of course, 1918, 2018, 100 years. Look, beloved family, you know, as I was studying this subject matter, it really dawned on me that during the First World War, beloved, over 17 million people lost their lives on all sides. And this is really a conservative estimate, 17 million. And if you know anything about that war, they call it the Great War. They call it the war to end all wars. You know, one of the things, because we live in Europe, because that's where we are, it's an island called Great Britain, but it's a part of that European continental shelf. But it's important to study the history of Europe and their wars. Imagine it's been 100 years since the end of the First World War, but imagine they once fought a 100-year war in Europe. 17 million people, beloved. And this was, you know, they call it a world war, which it became because it spread and engulfed large parts of our planet. A lot of people don't know necessarily what the causes are, and the historians are still debating today. That's right. They talk about the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. That's right. But they were also vying for who should control Africa. There were alliances between various European nations, and in the end, when certain conflicts broke out between parties, those who were in alliance with either one side or another felt it necessary to take sides. You know, we live in a world like that. We're in a world like that right now, where if Donald Trump continues down the road that he's going with these harsh sanctions against Iran and the other plans that they have in store for the destabilization of Iran and other parts of the Middle East, and if Israel attacks Iran or Israel persuades America to attack Iran, see, the Russians can't stay out of that. Right. Talking about alliances here. The Chinese can't stay out of that. You know, I heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan give a definition of Satan as opposed to the devil. And the distinction was that Satan's evil is not confined to himself. Do you understand? It has to ill affect everybody else. 17 million lives lost. Do you know, beloved, how much trauma must have been involved in the loss of 17 million lives? If 17 million died, do we have any concept of how many would have been injured? You know, when you hear about these bombs that go off and say 20 people die, invariably there's 40, 60, 70 injured who don't die, but they are maimed for life. I want to deal with the subject today of fear and how we as black people must eliminate fear from our psyche. We must not fear, because the enemy is involved in the manufacture of fear. Yes. Did you know that we live in a world where fear is an industry?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Do you understand that Hollywood peddles fear?
Yes,
right. We just came out of Halloween.
That's right.
We just came out of Bonfire Night. I wonder if we appreciate what war sounds like. But they have to remind themselves on a yearly basis on the 5th of November with all those explosions, yes, and all that cackling or rattling of gunfire. Look, beloved, World War II was even worse. According to estimates, between 50 and 80 million died in World War II. Between 50 and 80 million. Now, see, World War I, beloved, most of the veterans, they're kind of dead now. There's a few people who may have been little children when that was going on. They saw things. But the legacy of it remains with populations throughout Europe and in other parts of the world. And people are still traumatized in terms of genetic memory based on what happened 100 years ago. But the Second World War, which ended in 1945, much closer to home, between 50 and 80 million. See, I want us to understand, beloved, that when you're talking about killing on that level, that scale, because you know, these Europeans, in their criticism of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, in their labeling of the Nation of Islam as this racist group or racist or bigoted organization that they like to throw these accusations out, well, the implication behind these accusations is that we're some wicked and hateful, maybe murderous people. But we have no history of killing nobody. But look at their history. It's soaked in blood.
That's right.
You're not talking about thousands here, which would be bad enough. You're not talking about hundreds, which would be bad enough, but you're talking now. And again, don't forget what I was saying about if it's 80 million who died, how many were injured? How many were maimed? How many families destroyed? This is the reality of war that has happened. This is not something that we're making up. This is recorded history, which means that these people, beloved, and I want us to grow in confidence in terms of our ability to stop any accuser in the future who wants to point the finger at us. Who want to point the finger at us, beloved, as being perpetrators, when in reality the real perpetrators are those who are responsible for soaking the soil of the planet in blood. I was reading one report because I'm looking at the wars, and I'm reading one report because everybody knows about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two bombs that America dropped on Japan. They dropped one, Hiroshima, and apparently 150,000 people died immediately. Never mind the aftermath of fallout. And when they saw that bomb, they loved it. They said, "Ooh, it works. Let's do it again." So then they went to Nagasaki and dropped another one. Imagine a mentality like that. Because there was no need to drop those bombs. But they had these weapons and they had to prove that they worked. Look, my beloved family, we in the nation of Islam, we're not killers. Some of us were before we heard the teachings. Some of us were robbers and thieves, and we did all kinds of crazy stuff when we were in those streets, when we were under the tutelage of the Caucasian. But this man, Farad Muhammad, came to end the killing, to stop the killing. Who is it who have popularized stop the killing? Who is it who has popularized respect for life? I just want us to reclaim our true identity and stop all praise is due to Allah. And stop allowing the real bloodshedder from pointing the finger at us and having us getting shaky or wobbly. Some of us get too nervous when this demon accuses us. In the Bible it says that they accuse the righteous continuously.
That's right.
The Europeans, beloved, do you understand that they are motivated by fear? Their whole existence is a fear-filled or fearful existence. We talked about this a little bit last week, I think it was, when we talked about their term. The fact that they've been given a time to rule, and that their scholars and their thinkers, and some of those who are the politicians and others who are the money people, they understand the time and the fact that their time is now up. And so their influence that they formerly wielded on the planet is no longer in place. And that now there is a rising of those who were formerly kept down and oppressed. Because God is very clear, the bottom rail will rise to the top.
That's right.
The last will become first, and the tail will become the head. So this is the transition that you and I are living in the period of. We're living in a time of tremendous change. And the enemy knows this. And the enemy is going to work 24 hours, 7 days a week to try to undo or to reverse that process. And our job is to be sufficiently cognizant or wise or educated to the time and what must be done. All praise is due to Allah. We are talking about a man who has been responsible for killing 17 million people in one war, and then 80 million in another war, 10 million in the Congo. I want you to think about these figures. Possibly 2 million during the Vietnam conflict. He lost 58,200 and something. This is the American. But it's reported that he killed, in terms of the two sides in that conflict in Vietnam, approximately 2 million. Come to Iraq, millions have died and millions have been displaced as a result of that lie that was told and that attack that took place in 2003. Syria, Libya. You're not talking about, see, because on the television it's very sanitized. You don't see the reality of little children, men, women, and children being blown into pieces. You don't see the end result of 50 caliber shells or bullets hitting soft body tissue and destroying heads and limbs. We don't see that. It's a sanitized, it's a TV show. The latest report from the front line of the war zone. But real people are dying, real people suffer, real people starve and suffer from malnutrition. What's going on right now in the Yemen, where the children are now beginning to resemble how the children looked during the Nigeria Biafra conflict. Again, and you got to understand, even Nigeria and Biafra, see, where did that come from? Where did this thing come from in Rwanda, where Hutus and Tutsis were? See, the borders were drawn by Europeans. And there are some of us who claim to be historians who think that, oh, it was an oversight on the part of the Caucasian, that he didn't realize that he was cutting off people and creating divisions where none existed. No, this was by design. He knew that down the road it would create friction and possible tribal conflicts, and he wanted exactly that, because that's how he rules. Through chaos, he rules. Did the same thing in Kosovo. Look, beloved, what's my point? My point is that we have to understand that even though this man is a natural born killer. Can I get a witness?
Yes, sir.
Do you think he kills by accident?
Yes, sir.
Do you know that even though he's a natural born mischief maker, bloodshedder, and mass murderer, you and I have still got to show no fear when dealing with him. In fact, the complete opposite. We have to treat him as the child that he is. We have to have a different mentality. The Caucasian is our child. Whatever he's doing today, we have to take responsibility. Not only do we have to take responsibility, but it's our responsibility to end what he's doing. All praise is due to Allah. We can only end what he's doing by becoming the responsible parent that we are supposed to be. And telling him to sit his backside down and stop his mischief making, beloved. All praise is due to Allah. I'm not talking some foolishness here. We're talking about a mentality that black people have to develop now. No fear. When you get afraid of your own child, do you know what that child is going to do to you, beloved? It's one thing, two children having a fight, but when children turn on adults, the disrespect is compounded. Because they're looking at us and they're thinking, well, why are you scared? They know, it's like a dog. Do you know that the dog, by nature, knows that the man and the woman is his master? The dog knows this. And the dog, if we would demonstrate our true nature, the dog every time would back up. But when we run from the dog, the dog has a biting frenzy. It's an opportunity for a dog. Now they're going to say Leo compared white people to dogs. We need a perfect love. We need a perfected love. We need a love that when your brother says something to you, you don't immediately become suspicious. What do you mean by that? Don't do that, beloved. When your sister says something to you, you don't immediately become suspicious. Why? Because you're motivated by love, and you should understand that they are also motivated by the same love. And so when we are in love with one another properly, we're not fearful of, some ulterior motive of our brother or our sister. We don't have to walk around suspicious of one another. The scripture says in the Holy Quran, I believe, that after faith, suspicion is sin. When we met today, did we say hello? Or did we say assalamu alaikum? When a man gives you the greeting, beloved, try and find a better one to give back. And take the greeting for what the greeting is. It's a prayer. Wishing peace on your brother and sister. And you should return peace and love to the one who just gave you that greeting. Even if that one has been historically an enemy. Did you hear what I said, beloved? Yes, what if the historic enemy comes tomorrow and says, Assalamu alaikum, brother. What are you going to do? Or you're gonna love. is more powerful than hate or fear. The enemy knows this. And the last thing he wants to see us cultivate within ourselves is real love. For self and for kind. For self and for God. That's the last thing he wants to see, because when you really cultivate that love, beloved, all fear leaves. I found a few acronyms for fear. I thought I would share them with you. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of them. But fear, F-E-A-R. Well, let's look at the dictionary definition first. An unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Our ancestors, beloved, if you understand the system of hunting, capturing, chaining, marching, do you know that during slavery they would raid many villages and hamlets and towns within the interior of the African continent, and that quite often, in order for us to be enslaved, we would have to march in chains some 400 miles to the coast. 400 miles. And we died in our droves just getting to the coast. When we got to the coast, we were then imprisoned in slave dungeons or castles, where we would then have to stay there sometimes for weeks and sometimes months. In some cases, they could be housed within this confine for a year, waiting for another slave ship to arrive. And we died in our droves. People who have visited places like Gory Island and those slave castles, they say they can hear the echoes of the ancestors' cries in the walls. You got to understand something about energy. This ain't no fairy tale spookism we're talking about here. How many of you have walked into Mosque Mariam?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever been in there when it's empty? Completely empty. And there's such a beautiful atmosphere. It's clean. It feels peaceful and calm. There are some people's houses you can go into, and when you walk in, beloved, that's how it feels.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There's a tranquility and a peace. Because those people who live there, they've created an atmosphere. The Honourable Minister Louis Farrakhan told us to make our homes a mosque. There's some other houses you can walk into and all you want to do is leave. Because the atmosphere is chaos. You can feel it. Well, these slave dungeons, beloved, to this day they carry a vibration.
Teach, brother, teach.
Because of the suffering and the pain and the death that took place. Because we talked about 17 million dying in the First World War. We talked about 80 million dying in the Second World War. We talked about 2 million dying during Vietnam. And we can go on in terms of these wars. But see, slavery, beloved.
Teach, brother, teach.
According to conservative estimates, over 100 million of us lost our lives in the Middle Passage alone. That's just what happened on the ocean. When we got into the holds of those ships, beloved, the ships were designed specifically up near the bow of the ship to house children.
Yes, sir.
Who were chained in a particular way, side by side, next to each other, like sardines. And as it opens up now, you get adults, male and female, chained, and they were kept like that, sometimes again for months, coming through that middle passage. We died of all manner of diseases and, brutality, because they would beat us at the same time. Some Africans died from a disease called melancholy, sadness. Imagine that. You just pass away because you're so depressed that your system shuts down, stops working. Then there were suicides where we would jump overboard. As soon as they would bring us up on the surface, sometimes they'd bring us up to have a little walk after maybe 3 weeks of being down in the darkness. Some of these wicked demons would chain us and throw us overboard and drag us, what they call keel haul, around the ship to wash us. This is how they washed us in the ocean. The sharks in the ocean stopped foraging for food and would just follow the slave ships, because black bodies were going over the side so regular that they could feed and become fat. This is the reality. And then we land in North America, in Europe, in the Americas, South America. We land in Brazil. We land. And the torment continues. After that, they called it seasoning, because we were still not acquiesced to slavery. We were still not ready to submit, and we had to be seasoned, in other words, forced to be slaves. Look, beloved, our suffering, there's nobody on the planet who can equal the suffering of black people over the 463 years that we've been sojourning in this world, in this Western Hemisphere. Even after we were seasoned, and you should go back and watch Roots again.
Teach, brother, teach.
Everybody should watch Roots after knowing the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. You get greater insight into what was going on and how Kunta Kinte was being coached or educated by, not Chicken George, the one, Fiddler, to forget about Africa. Get that out of your head. You're in America now. Do as the slave master tells you. And Kunta Kinte is thinking about running away, and he's thinking about Allah, and he's thinking about Africa, and he's thinking about who he really is. And he can't understand why all these Africans are so acquiescent. How they're all so, accepting, but it's because of what they've been through. It's because they've been totally beaten, castrated, mauled, murdered into submission. Fear. We're dealing with fear today. What I'm saying is this, beloved. Our ancestors went through the fear so that you and I don't have to go through that fear. They paid the price that you and I could be here today. Understand that when these brothers and sisters were half naked, wearing, I think they call it burlap, or in Jamaica it's a crocus bag. This is the clothing, some rough, coarse thing that they gave us to wear to work in the cotton fields or the cane fields. We had nothing then. We had no rights whatsoever. We wasn't allowed. Do you know that you could look at the white man in his eye on pain of death? We were not allowed to look directly at a white man. When the white man came, we had to lower our heads. And we had to call him Massa. Master. Look, beloved, we're not in that condition today. What our people went through, they went through that for us. And they prayed, beloved family, for a day like this, when we would be free, but need to go free totally. Kanye West wasn't lying when he said that it's a choice. We've got the choice now, man. And let's choose life. Let's choose freedom. And stop choosing fear and bowing down to that which is not worthy to be bowed down to. All praise is due to God.